Hello, welcome to MS is Great channel. In this video, you're going to see how to use the Graph API within the custom connector. The Graph API gives you more options to connect with the M365 components, especially for the OneDrive options. There are additional features which you can do with Graph API. I'm going to demonstrate in this video on how to connect Graph API by creating a custom connector and use it with Power Automate. This is the steps which we're going to follow in the Power Automate or the custom connector creation. You can see the first step is to create the Azure app registration. This is the usual procedure to create the app, and you need to add the redirect URL. Make a note of this URL. You might need it to add it in the app registration. Once the app registration is created, need to add the permission to read the OneDrive, and of course we need the OneDrive URL, Graph API URL, and the response header and the preview to add it into the custom connector. And finally, in the custom connector, you need to mention those OAuth credentials which been created in the app registration, and also the schema. Let's get started. So as the first step, I'm going to create the Azure app. You can always go to log into the Azure and go to the Microsoft Entra ID, and here you have an app registration. You can create a new app by registering it. I'm going to add pp app connector. You can name it anything, and I leave it to the default settings. And the redirect URI, you can select the redirect URI, select it to be a web, and as I mentioned in the slide, you need to use this URI specifically for this graph connector, because later when the custom connector is created, this is the URL which has been created, and we are going to add one more URL later. And finally, you need to just register, and once it is registered, you need to go through the app API permission. You can see here API permission, and add the permission and use the Graph API delegated permission and look for file, and you can read files read all, and make sure that it has been created and the files read. These two options should be enabled for the OneDrive read. And one option is also suggested is to have sites read all. So make sure that these three permissions been added. Add the permission. You can see here user.read is by default, and these are the three which have been added. So once been added, make sure that you grant admin consent. So it has been consented, and this consent been added. So now as the last step, what you should do is that you should create a certificate and secret. So create a client secret, enter some description. So once you create it, I usually set it to very low value, which is 90 days is the minimum, and you can add it. So once you add it, you will see the key here, and you can copy this key. You might need it. So you need this client key, as well as make sure that you copy the application ID, which is the client ID. These two are very important. You copy and have it ready in your text pad, so later you might need that. So the first step is done. So basically we have created these two. Then we are moving on to the next step. Let's go to the Power Automate and go to the custom connector. And here we need to create a custom connector, and before that, make sure that in the Graph Explorer you have this URL. So what we're going to do is that I'm going to use the OneDrive list of all the drives in my OneDrive. That makes it easy to get the list of drives. So this is the URL which I'm going to use it in the custom connector as well. So make sure you use this drive, and if you get any error, so in the Graph Explorer, make sure that you log in with the M365 ID. This works with only with the work ID, so you need to log in with work ID, and you type the URL here and modify the permission. In the modify permission, make sure that you have the file read all, and this is not mandatory, but you need to have this. And make sure that once you click on that, you have the response ready. Make sure you get the response, also the header. So these are the prerequisite to create the custom connector. So make sure that these things are there. So now go back to your Power Automate or the custom connector. I'm going to create a new blank custom connector. Name it as PP OneDrive. So okay, so you can upload an icon. So this is default, and here you can give the description. This connector has list of all OneDrive API. Use this to get OneDrive lists from user. Okay, done. And make sure that here you need to specify the graph API, which is graph.api.com. So copy this. I'm going to paste it here. graph.microsoft.com, sorry, and the base should be /. Now go to security and make sure that you have OAuth 2.0, and once you select OAuth 2.0, make sure that it is Azure AD, Azure Active Directory, and this is where you need to copy your client ID and your client secret, which you copied from there. So make sure you copy it properly here, and I'm going to do it from here. So the client ID is something which is here, client ID. Copy this and paste it here, and then the client secret. So for now I'm just copying the same. In your case you should use the original one. Okay, and copy it from here. I think client and the client secret, I think I can copy to the clipboard, and I am pasting it here. That's it. And the resource URL, again you should use the graph API. Make sure that it is copied here. This is the resource URL. That's it, the scope. So now if you notice here the redirect URL, this will be automatically generated, and make sure once it is generated, copy and paste it again back into the Azure app. So now what we are going to do is that we are going to move on to the next definition. So here I am going to define the method for the OneDrive or the Graph API method. So here in the action, I am going to add an action which is, let me have the summary, get all drives from my OneDrive. And similarly, the description you can put it here. Operation ID could be like list my drives. That's it. And here you need to import from the sample. This is the same get method, and copy from here. Go to Graph Explorer, copy the URL, and you can paste it here. You don't need to specify the header because it's just a get method. You can just import it. This will automatically import the method. You can see here. and now you need to add the default response. So click on the default and click on import from sample. So here you need to specify the header and the body. Let's go back to the Graph Explorer. So make sure you run this query and get your response preview and the header. Copy this, ignore the bracket, just copy only the and paste it here. And similarly you need to go to the response preview and copy the full response, and paste it here. And once it is done, click on import. So once you import it here, you would see here those have been added here, and for some reason you would see that the action has unable to resolve schema. So this is where the things become so complicated. Why? Because the output schema which you see here is a bit kind of a complex for the system to convert that into a schema here. So that's why it could not be able to resolve it to the schema. So in these scenarios, what I usually do is that I would convert manually the response. This is JSON response. You can convert manually to a JSON schema and then paste it into the action here. So I'm going to demonstrate how to do that. So get this schema, and you can, so this is the one which I use it often. You can paste your schema here, the response here, and generate the schema. So what it does is it will generate the schema. You can see here, this is a schema which has been generated. You can copy the schema and then put it into your Visual Studio Code. So here what I'm going to do is that I'm going to run the Visual Studio Code and paste the schema here. So here you can see the schema which has been generated, and I'm going to trim out the schema, remove this which are not needed, and make sure that wherever the required parameter you remove it, or else you might have an issue when you paste it in the schema there. So usually I just remove all the required, and this one as well, because sometimes these are optional but the schema makes it really required, and this one as well, and also this one. Wherever you see the required, I'm going to remove it, and finally this is the one required, remove it. Okay, so now the schema is completely optional, everything is optional. And also make sure you don't need these tips, because this graph tips are generated at random runtime. So when you copy this and run your real OneDrive thing, you might get error because this is not generated from the response. Okay, so make sure all these modification has been done, and let's go through one more time and make sure that everything is good. So now this schema is ready. Copy this schema, go back to your connector now, and you can see here this has been giving error, and now switch to the Swagger, and you will have to go through this response and default, description, default, schema, just remove whatever it is there. Okay, so you can remove till here and just paste the schema which you copied. You will get a information saying that it will be converted into YAML. Yes, I want the YAML, so now it will be automatically converted. And yeah, you can see here everything is fine. You can see here there should not be any error. So now the schema is set in the YAML file. revert it back, you can see here, voila. So now you can see here, this is a well-defined YAML with a schema, and you can see all the parameters listed down here. So now it's a well-defined one. So click on the create connector. Okay, so unable to save, 3 errors in the security tab. So make sure that you go back to the security tab and then fix those errors. Okay, so this is the client ID. Actually, it requires a client ID. Somehow it has been misplaced. Let me go back to the overview and copy the client ID, paste it here. This is one error which has been fixed. Resource URL, again, I don't know how it has missed. Let me copy the same HTTP here. Resource URL, that's it. Okay, and then in the general, I think it should have things. Okay, make sure that everything is done. It's here, definition, it's all perfect, unable to save. Okay, so now let's move on to create. It has started creating the connector now. It will take a while. So once the custom connector has been created, we need to test the connector so that it can create a connection to the custom connector. And once the connection is ready, then we are good to test the custom connector. You can see here the custom connector has been successfully created. So now what we do is that we go directly to the test and click on the new connection. And we should be able to connect it here. So let me check. Okay, so you can see here there is an error. Why there is an error? Because it is trying to redirect into a different URL. Why? Because URL redirect URL, there is a new redirect URL being created for this custom connector. So what we should do is that we should go back to the security and copy this redirect URL. So once you copy this redirect URL, go back to your app registration in the Azure, click on the web and add the another URL. Okay, so add this and save it. Okay, so once it is saved, give it a minute, then go back to your custom connector, definition, and then update the connector. Make sure you update the connector. Successfully updated. So now you can test it and try to create a connection. It is trying to create a connection now. Okay, takes a while. Okay, now the connection has been created. Now we can test the operation. So make sure this is selected here, and I'm going to test the operation. So this should return the list of drives. Okay, see here it is successful. Ignore these error. You cannot fix these error because it is a minor schema related warning. So now the custom connector is ready, and we can add it to the Power Automate. So now let me go through the flow and create a instant cloud flow, manually created OneDrive, and I'm going to create, so manually created flow. So now I'm going to add the connector here. So let me check whether it is available here. Yeah, it is available, PP OneDrive, and you can see here get all the drive. That's it, no parameters. So I'm just going to call this, and you can just add compose method, and here in the compose method you would see all the details have been come. So like the drive ID and the drive name, so you can select the drive ID to display the drive ID. You can also create a HTML table coming using the output and then just use it. So I'm going to save this and going to test it out. Successfully saved. Now I'm going to test it out. Manually test this and continue. Run the flow. Started to run. So let's see. Okay, so here is it. It has successfully executed. You can see the same result here, and you can get the ID, the drive ID. So this is my OneDrive drive ID, so I can just manipulate that. Okay, so this is how you use the Graph API within the custom connector. Hope this is really helpful. Subscribe and like.